The Marino Show. Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Marino Show. I'm your host, David Marino. Today, my guest is Jack Darling, a magician based here in Austin, Texas. Jack also has performed storytelling, comedy, and given speeches on stages across the U.S. Jack, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm excited to talk to you. I've been watching some of your videos on YouTube and on social media. And, I haven't interviewed a magician before. I know that's just one aspect of what you do, but what led you down a path to get into magic and to put on shows like this?
Well, I first was introduced to magic, of course, as a kid, and a guy that my mom hung out with, sold some drugs to when I was a kid, was in the circus. And when he would stop in, he would do tricks to entertain me. And so he taught me to, disappear quarters and eat broken glass, and all sorts of things. And so it kind of started there. And I would just, from time to time, it would come out at parties and stuff. But I didn't really start following it because as a kid, we didn't have a lot of money. So it was hard to have access to books or, any kind of stuff on magic. So if someone knew it around me, then I would pick it up, or I would try to, just learn it as quickly as I could and burn it in my brain. It wasn't really until I was in my 20s that I started to perform it a lot more. First in college, I wrote it into a school play that I was doing. And so that was pretty fun, but it wasn't until really I took a pretty severe beat down on 6th Street from some men. And after coming back from that, I was pretty much feeling like a person who was half alive and half dead. And so I started first by just kind of going out into the world as Charlie Chaplin. And I added tricks to my little outfit. And, I grew up, even though I'm a white kid, I grew up loving Michael Jackson and breakdancing. So I was on the streets breakdancing as Charlie Chaplin, entertaining people, trying to just get back into the world because that beat down really was something that just changed my landscape. And I just felt, like I said, I just felt dead. And I didn't know if I could bring the joy back into my life. But through becoming Charlie Chaplin and doing magic and dancing all around the city, people were so kind and no one questioned my gender or, just who I was really. They just wanted to have fun with me. And so that kind of led basically to really starting a career in magic. I'd been drag kinging prior to that, which was really fun, but it wasn't enough. I wanted to explore other things. And so, it's like those things often in your life that happen, that sidetrack you. But, if you do a little bit of healing and you don't give up and for me, it's always been creativity. As a young kid, I always had imaginary friends and, just ways to, kind of dissociate from the problems and kind of make it to where I could deal with what was happening, and so magic really became a way to kind of save myself in a sense.
I was reading about your background and your bio, and of course, you mentioned it here just a second ago that you had a pretty rough upbringing that kind of led you to escape. Can you touch a little about that? You don't have to get too much into it if you're not comfortable talking about it, but I think it's an important message to people watching this because sometimes the creativity, the art, whatever that is, whether it's music, being a magician, whatever that is important to escape into for people who are in these really tough situations, especially young people.
Yeah, I think I was fortunate. I think, as we're all born with these crazy imaginations, right? But over time, life just kind of causes us to shut them down, and I think I was lucky at a very young age to be sparked by the imagination so much. I lost, for instance, my bunny was killed in a tornado. And so he came back to me larger than life, like a human. And became my playmate, whenever things were really bad. And then, a guy OD'd in our house, and he looked like uh, just like a skeleton. So he became someone because he OD'd, and I saw this whole thing happen. Now I don't know that if he's dead. My mother said he did not die, but like he looked dead, and they were trying to get me to do CPR on him. It was this crazy thing. But in my mind, he died and came back as my imaginary friend. So I had these weird imaginary friends through death. And then the last imaginary friend I had was actually this is probably around 7. My father murdered a woman, and I she came back as a ghost, just in a bloody dress without a face. It was just blackness. And these 3 people would spend time with me in my room, and we would kind of create together. We'd have little shows, and just because I was grounded a lot, so I was in that room a ton. And they would, for my parents, because they were both, my mom was a drug addict and my stepfather was a raging alcoholic, so they would forget about me, and I would kind of go into this world with these people that had things happen to them, right, that were pretty terrible, and would ease the pain, actually, and pass the time, and we'd sit at what I had a little cardboard table, and we would play games and talk to each other. And it was a time to just pass without feeling so lonely. And so creativity for me has always been something that first I feel like was really sparked from a lot of pain from the way that I grew up, and then ultimately became just the way I coped with a lot of issues. You see, my father was a kind of guy that was his own monster. So actually, I was obsessed. I can see Jason back there with
Mhm.
Jason from Friday the 13th, the first movies I watched of his, I'd say the first 3, because I was going through such a rough time and I felt like I lived with monsters, my father being one of them, and had he made threats even after he left us, to come back for us, and ultimately ended up killing this woman with a machine gun who tried to leave him. And when I researched her, this is like so it started young, but like this woman, I've carried her with me forever. And so to speak on creativity, I felt like I couldn't talk about her story until I was able to physically create some tricks around her. So a lot of magicians, you'll see that they build boxes, and these boxes, you don't know, I mean, they're just like, what are those? A girl gets in them, you stab her, you take the swords out and show she's unscathed, right? I was i was like, I can't talk about Donna, the woman my father murdered, without being able to figure out a way to physically represent her as best as I can right now as a magician, because I'm creating these things. Um and so I built a casket, and she would come out of that casket, and I made a whole dress that could dance around, and it was very ghost like. And she basically would, like the shot, it was like really artsy. I think it was a little too artsy, but it was my first kind of pivot into like dealing with this. And I was a little more heavy handed. A lot of my shows, I put a lot of magic with a lot of magical comedy with what's happening. But with this show, because it was about a real human being who ultimately, as I talk about in the play that I wrote, she was a sacrifice, sadly, that basically meant that no one else would be hurt by my father. And so and all of these images came to me from my childhood with her, from watching, Friday the 13th and all these scary movies when I was a kid, because I was obsessed with horror, because I was around a lot of horror. And I would actually, when I was a kid, just like look at the TV and try to convince Jason to come out and kill my stepfather, you know, and I was just, it was like a real thing. I'd pause the TV, just staring, into his eyes. And so, my imagination has always been activated by the weird gore, but it was because of the intensity that I grew up around. There was a lot of yelling and fighting and intent. There were times my mom, from a beating, looked like an alien, and didn't even look like herself. So I took all of these things and they became part of the imaginative world that I created. A little bit weird, right? But it was a way to survive.
As you moved forward through life and started to get more entrenched in magic, how did your show change, and what would you describe your show like to somebody who hasn't seen it?
Yeah, I would say in the beginning it was, just comedy, straight up silliness. Like, if you listen to the audience, they will tell you who you are, because I didn't know who I was as a character. I had just come off of playing Charlie Chaplin to survive, just dealing with people and wanting to be out of my own skin, because I just felt so horrible after that beating. I felt worthless, and I felt like all those, I had thought I'd escaped my childhood, but that beating was one of the worst I'd ever encountered. And so, yeah, so I wanted to be someone else for a while. But then after doing that for a while and finding the kindness in people again and finding the strength to be myself, I still didn't know what I was doing. I was just like, all right, I'm going to do magic now. But like, who am I? And so it was like a few nights of, show after show where you might move a guy. And every time I moved a guy, people would laugh in the audience, because I dress up in a suit, I got a little mustache on, and I'm quirky and weird, and I don't want to ever seem like I'm suave, because all magic can go wrong. So I'm always acting up. I'm just like my brother said when he came to a show, like something broke. He was like, I didn't know if it was on purpose or if you did it. And he's my brother. So I was like, yes. So with people, the audience just let me know I would just move these guys around. And for some reason, people thought that was hilarious. So then I just started doing more physical comedy with guys. I was like, screw the girls. I mean, they're great, but like all the guy magicians pull the pretty girl up. I was like, I'm just going to pull guys up. That's going to be what I do. And you don't see guys and me playing in the world. There's no buddy movies with me and some straight dude or whatever. So in my own way, I was like kind of playing with just the audience vantage point of what they normally see. And I think that's what they found so funny in it. And then I decided, well, I'm going to start flirting with these guys. I'm going to start having more fun with them and just kind of pushing the envelope. And so my show can get pretty wild. I have a trick called What's in My Pants. And I don't call girls up for that because that would be weird. I call guys up and we do this whole thing where I basically dress this guy up in like a pink suit and a wig and give him like balloon boobs and like, just make him look like somebody that, I could fall in love with. And so I just, and I give him an adoration. Now, how in the beginning, I would sometimes pick the wrong guy. He would look like he was the guy that would come up there and be like super easy. But, some of them would be kind of difficult or a little strange. And so what I did over time, what you learn through listening through to your audience, is that if I ask the women, is your man an awesome dude who is comfortable with himself that could come up here and hang out with me and have a terrific time? Raise your hand. And so I would let the women pick. And you know what? They do not let you down. And I ask for consent in everything we do, which I think is important. A lot of male magicians don't do that with females. You'll see them doing stuff where they're like going to cut a rope, but they put their arms around the girl and then they cut the rope. That makes no sense for what they're doing. So I try to really look at my script and be like, how do I make this make sense? And how do I ask for permission to make sure, that we're like on a good, even playing field for the most part. But, the What's in My Pants trick is killer. It got me so much work for many years because a guy puts on like a crazy pink glove, to wash dishes with. And he's trying to figure out what's in my pants by touching my pants, touching me right in the midsection here. And, he's got a glove on, so everything's safe. And he touches it. And each time he gets it wrong, I say, well, if you get it wrong for the third time, you got to go in my pants. And when he does go in, he pulls out a rubber chicken. And that rubber chicken stretches really far. And so I say, okay, now things are going to get crazy or whatever. And I basically show all the cards are different, let them drop to the floor. And then he basically takes my rubber chicken and he puts it on any card he wants. It's so goofy, but it gets a lot of laughs because it's so weird and it's a different way to be like, pick a card. And so he, stretches out the head of my chicken, puts it on a card, and then he picks up the card and basically I have him, he doesn't get to look at it, he puts it in his pocket. And then I say, okay, if I'm about to prove tonight that you and I are a perfect match. And I say, you have to go in my pants one more time. And of course he's like, oh no, sometimes they get stuck in my pants and they think I do it on purpose. But I'm like, no, so
Yeah.
it's like I have to hold on to him because one guy was so stuck, he was pulling so hard that he almost went off the stage. I was like, oh my God, and grabbed him and pulled him back. But, I also do sweet stuff too, but like some of the bigger tricks are a little bit more risque and, kind of playing around. And it's a lot of fun. So I spend a lot of time trying to, just take old tricks and dust them off and put a comic spin on them. And the what's in my pants came because I watched Steve Martin fly Dini, which is totally different from what I'm doing. But I was always the trick makes me laugh, and so I was like, I want to come up with my own what's in my pants trick, and do something kind of silly with it. And because of the juxtaposition of me and some stray guy, it really adds a lot of fun and flair to the stage. So it's a blast to do.
Not only do you perform magic, but you mentioned that you're writing a play or have written a play. Can you talk a little about that as well?
Yeah, so well, I'm doing two different writing things. One of them's on the back burner right now. The plays are, but so I'm also writing a novel. But the plays themselves are the ones that I wrote. I've been some award-winning plays, entered them in festivals and stuff, and it was a three-part series of kind of just a magic trajectory of my life, starting from kind of being a kid, and I, take some of the normal tricks are really simple and there's not a lot of meaning to them, but they're flowing with whatever story I'm telling. So, because what I wanted to do, like after making people laugh, which is my favorite thing, is like getting crazy and doing oddball things, uh, was to actually, it was just getting boring. Like I needed something a little more. So I wanted to do the meaning. And after doing the storytelling around town and doing really well, I was like, okay, let's try to add this storytelling to the magic now and then give it more meaning so that, each trick that I do is going to be a trick from, could be from the 1800s, but I'm going to modernize it with a story and make it have more meaning. Like for instance, I had two guys had this huge long like 50-foot rope and I have two guys come up and they're tying me up to a chair, right? So there's like a rope escape. But I'm also talking about how I going through a very intense time in my life where I think I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to beat the clock, right? And this whole thing is built around beating the clock. So instead of just making it a stunt that's like, this is how Houdini got out in so many minutes or whatever, it's more or less talking about a time in my life where I really thought, that's it, I'm going to kill myself or whatever. And I put more emphasis on just the personalization of taking this very old trick and then making people care, a little more than just like the clock, because they're wanting to know what happens at the end, like they see me get out, but then I tell them like what happened and how I got out. And so it's taking, because magic has all these amazing tricks, like, you could make someone disappear and float and do all these different things, but oftentimes you don't see people give them the kind of meaning that could just make it just like open and expand someone's heart. And so that's what I'm working on. So I did three different plays of my life. The last one being the one I was talking about with Donna, the woman my father murdered, because it was the one that I had the most trouble writing and doing. And so eventually I'd like to take the three pieces and take the best of and make it a whole show, somewhere around an hour to an hour and 20 minutes. Um, I think that would be tremendous. But I I ended that show just before COVID. And then then there was no shows going on. And then during that time, I started writing the novel that I'm writing. So uh, I've been spending more time on that because what I realize is I can't split my brain. Like every time I try to do that, it's like when you get obsessed about magic, then I just want to live in it. And like the novel is so will get pushed to the side. And if I ever want to finish it, I'm like, okay, let's just take your crazy brain and stick it right here.
And is the novel about your life or is it something
Yeah,
different?
so it's loosely based on my life. Like I thought it was going to be about my life because I've been doing so much storytelling around town and I'd gotten really good feedback from people. But every time I sat down to write it, even though I had all this material, it was like I couldn't move it forward. And I also had this strange little voice talking to me in my head, which I know sounds crazy, but any kind of creatives know what I mean. You just, however your muse comes to you, it does. And it was just this little kid. And I was just finally like, okay, listen, I don't know what's going to happen here. I'm just going to write to this like weird voice because I'm so stuck and I can't seem to move forward and I'm unable to get on stage and I'm losing my mind because I'm not doing anything super creative except, kind of staying home and just, because of COVID, I'm just like losing my mind. And so basically I sat down and I just wrote, kid, what do you want? What's your problem? And the answer back to me, I'm just writing this, was, "You're too old to tell this story." And so I was like, wow, that's a real diss, kid. All right, okay, that's all right. Well, if that's the case, well, I'm gonna go sit down at the computer right now, and then you write the story for me. And so basically, I went and sat, and this whole voice came out, and I just basically been chasing it ever since. And I'm about 80% done with my first draft, and so I thought it would be about my life, but it's not. So it's a based on, it's kind of a Southern tale because I grew up in Texas and a trailer park kid, and it's starting from the age 7. This kid's name Hell Brambles, and you kind of just follow this kid through this life's journey of dealing with a bunch of drug addicts, and ultimately just it's a story about survival. But I get to talk about my imaginary friends through it. But this kid also wants revenge, so there's some things that are happening that didn't happen in real life, which is really fun, but also like, whoa, I'm for most of the structure, I can steal so much from my life because a lot of crazy things happen. But now there's some crazier things happening that I'm like, oh, wow, I didn't know that was going to happen. So it's really a surprise. And it's also kind of nice to not totally be following my story because it kind of adds a little distance for me. And, I'm enjoying whatever's going on with this voice that's happening. It feels so outside of me, but also in me. Like it's like me as a kid that still exists. And I get to, one of the things that I think the sweetest moments about writing this novel for me right now is, I was talking to my mom. We didn't talk for 15 years, and we've only been talking maybe the last 8 years or something like that. Again, is that I was telling her about it, and she said to me, I was telling her some little things, and she doesn't really like to talk about the past too much. So sometimes I have to be like, so did this happen? And sometimes she'll admit it. And then other times she's like, no, I'm not going to admit to that or whatever. But it was a sweet moment where she said, because I've been feeling a lot of tenderness about this, about myself as a little kid, because I was just trying to survive it. But my mom said, one of the things that you were so sweet about you when you're a kid, because you were a rascal, because I was mischievous, is that I anytime I saw someone heartbroken or upset, that I was always trying to entertain them or make them a little drawing or a little heart thing and make them feel better. And ultimately, like when she said that, it reigned so supreme in my heart because I feel like this little kid is helping me feel better and feel a lot of love, even though I have to watch a lot, because I'm watching this as a movie in my brain. A lot of things happen or relive a lot of things that happened to me. But ultimately, I'm reminded of how much kindness I started off with. And that over time, a lot of things got whittled away because there was just so much pain along my journey. And so I feel like now I'm kind of journeying back to the sweetness. And it's been a terrific experience, sometimes daunting because there's so much to be written still, but also like a joy because if I hadn't taken this journey like I sometimes I'm so mad about COVID, but it did give me a chance to like settle down, because I love the stage so much and be able to focus on something that I've been wanting to write for 20 years. So
I think a lot of us have things in our lives that happened to us when we were younger or even older that you kind of repress and you don't talk about. But sometimes when somebody presents it in a way such as yourself through a magic show or something, people can resonate with that because maybe part of their life experience was similar to what you went through in their own way. Have you talked to people who have said that watching your show or because it's deeper than just your typical magic show or even through your storytelling, have you had people come up to you and say that they resonate with that or that they can relate in some way to that?
yeah, so pretty much every show, especially during any time I'm doing the serious magic or even the storytelling, I mean, that's been what's incredible. I think growing up the way I did, there weren't many stories about a kid like me. I think we all experience that in various ways, right? So you're constantly trying to find yourself in the world. You feel so alone. You're trying things on, and sometimes you don't have the ability, and I think that's what's been most incredible for me to think about, is these people who would never be able to share their story on stage like I do, would never think about it, right? I mean, I've had many people say that, but be so grateful to see themselves, or to see a piece of themselves explored out in the open. And one woman told me one night, it just felt so freeing to be there. She's like, I didn't want to come tonight. Like, I was like, oh, I don't want to go to this stupid storytelling show. And then she was like, I tried to get out of it, but then I couldn't. And then I was here, and then I cried during the entire thing that you said. And now I'm talking to you, and I hope I don't seem like a weirdo. I was like, no, not at all. I was like, let's hug it out, you know? Those are the incredible moments. I think one of the most one that hit me hard was a guy who was like 6'8", was at the show one night, and he just happened to stumble in. It was a storytelling show for Testify. And I told a pretty intensive story, and he walks up to me. You know, I can see him over everyone. He's huge, right? And but he looked to me, and even before we touched, like a 5-year-old kid. Like there was just something in his face and the way he was moving toward me. And he was like, Jack, can I hug you? And I was like, yeah. And so we hugged. Of course, he had to lean down, like, you know, and and I could feel him shaking, like his whole body shaking. And I get a little choked up about it because, you know, he's just said, I'm from out of town. I just happened to stumble in here. And he's like, you just told my story. And I really needed to hear that. And I'm not going to drink tonight. You know, I'm not going to drink away the pain. I'm just going to feel it tonight. I'm going to go home. I'm not going to look for a girl tonight to, just, you know, knock away the pain. I'm just going to go home. I'm going to sit with it. I'm going to write about it tonight. And that one really hit me because I could feel everything coming from him. And I've got like chills right now thinking about it, because
I
it's
know
just,
I'm even like getting teary-eyed because, you know, people have a hard time expressing their pain and they don't always know how to do it. And I think, you know, what you're doing is, whether you know it or not, is providing an outlet for others as well.
yeah, I mean, I guess that's the hope. You know, I mean, it's like when people, my brother and a couple of people are like, why you got to share all your and I'm like, trust me, I would like to be the person that just didn't need to share this stuff. It's not easy. Vulnerability hangovers are terrible, you know, especially when I first started sharing. It was just like, I would just wake up the next day and just be like, what have I done? You know, like, even though people said nice stuff, it was just like I hadn't gotten used to that feeling of like cracking myself open publicly. I just really appreciate being able to talk about the art form, you know, and all of the ways that, you know, in which we're just trying to survive life. You know, some of us use our creativity, or, you know, disappear in different ways. But I've just been lucky enough to just kind of keep finding my way in the world through making things, you know, and that has kept me, you know, among the living. And I feel very blessed to you know, to be able to have these conversations, you know, with people like you, and to be able to get on the stage and have conversations with strangers who, you know, had an experience with what was, you know, what they saw that night that I did.